when you suggested the topic of healthy eating, Mariusz, I have to say, inside I died a little. I was like, I'm just not that interested in healthy eating. And then I thought, crikey, this is a really big topic. And it kind of exploded my brain slightly with all the whys, etc., etc. And that's me. I know I have a kind of analytical way of looking at things, and sometimes it hamstrings me. You have a very good way of looking at things where you kind of see where you want to go, I think, and present information very well. So it could be an interesting conversation we have today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and why I really wanted to talk about it today is because, as you know, I've been training for over 10 years, and I've been trying to adhere to really healthy eating for most of that time. And every other person that I meet, they think that it just comes naturally to me. I want to tell everyone that it's not easy. It's not easy, and it's always a struggle. There are ups and downs. There are times then you fall off the wagon and you just start eating, all this unhealthy stuff.
I feel like sometimes I spend my life off the wagon, kind of getting dragged along and bumped along the ground, because my eating habits, particularly in the last 2-3 years, have been pretty poor. They've not aligned themselves with my values or what I want, and that bothers me somewhat. But it's such a general thing, and we have to eat every day, that it's so easy to ignore.
Yeah, and the other thing is, most of us know exactly what we're doing wrong. We know exactly that we shouldn't be eating, so much of a junk food, that we should replace, let's say, some sweets with some fruits, for instance. But, our minds, the way they're designed, is that it's like, our brain is hunting for mouth pleasure, for an easy fix, for something really sugary, for something really, really fatty. I understand that there are some evolutionary basis to it, but like I said, the biggest problem for me is that knowing is one thing, but being able to apply it in your day-to-day life is not always easy. And one thing that I can tell for certain is that although the beginning is always really, really hard, when I'm saying beginning, the beginning of eating healthier, over time it gets much easier. It's so much easier to resist these, negative temptations. Not to say that they disappear. My downfall is sweets. I've got a sweet tooth, and that's what's usually spoil it for me. And although most of the year I would eat, quite consistently healthy, there are times, and I'm talking, 2-3 times a year, that I completely fall off the wagon, and I beat myself over it, so hard. And that's another thing that I want to talk about, is that we shouldn't be beating ourselves over something like that, because what it does is actually demotivates us from eating healthy. So even if I fall off the wagon, even if it's, not only one meal, even if it's a week, I just, decide, okay, from tomorrow morning, I'm just going to start over. And it works. It really, really works. Again, this is a habit. This is something you can train yourself to do. What's your take on it? Is that what you've experienced?
I've kind of meandered on my own path with food. We all have a different relationship with food. For me, I haven't tried many diets per se, like to be completely strict and stick to one particular diet. I've followed principles, and I've tried to limit the unhealthy food that you eat at times in my life, particularly. So principles I've followed is always try and eat the healthy food first, and then eat the sweet stuff, if you're going to have some sweet stuff. There's been some principles or ideas I've followed that haven't been so healthy, I think. I've had a concept that you have to finish all the food on your plate, and I don't think that's always so healthy. I've looked at other people and observed how they interact with their food, and a lot of people do as I do, and they feel compelled to eat all the food. And then other people, they have no compulsion to do that, and they'll kind of pick and eat what they want when they're full. And part of that's to do with your mindset with food. It's when's your next meal coming? When's the scarcity? So So I think for people who are used to having regular food come in their mind, they're kind of okay with that. But as I say, I've not strictly followed particular diets. I've followed principles sometimes where for instance, I wouldn't eat unhealthy. I wouldn't eat sweet cakes and things like that before I'd had the savoury food. That was the principle I followed. Savoury food first and then cakes. So there's been some healthy principles I've followed. There's been other times in my life where I've cut out all that sort of food. I've just tried to eat healthy food, reduce sugar. However, I've never really strictly followed any diet ever. Have you followed diets, and which one has worked the best for you, do you think?
Over 10 years, I've tried a number of different diets, low-fat diets, low-carbs diets, high-protein diets. I've even tried being a vegetarian for a short while. It didn't work out as well as I expected. But the bottom line is that we're all different. And I think that what everyone has to understand, that we'll all respond differently to different diets because we've got different bodies. We've got different genders. We've got a different hormonal balance or lack thereof. And we've got a different sleeping patterns. And all of these little factors, including a physical activity, will determine whether or not any given diet will work for you. Right now, after testing, so many different diets, I came to conclusion that yes, there are certain principles that as long as you will adhere to those, you should be all right. That can be quite tricky because, I talk to people often and they say, I try to eat healthy for a week or two. It's not for me. It's just, I have to resist so many temptations and I just feel deprived all the time. And it can be healthy, mental health-wise. But I think that it's not that simple. You can't really decide whether or not something is working for you after just testing for 2-3 weeks, because clearly it took many, many years for you to get to the place where you are. If you're even thinking about, changing your diet, so you cannot expect that you will have, immediate results. So I think that that's one of the key things. The other problem that I can see among people is that they're looking at the diet as something that's going to be for a set period of time, something that they can go on to until they achieve, some short-term goal, and after that they can go back to whatever lifestyle they had. The problem that I can see here is that, this reasoning is quite strange to me because, there's a reason why you got to where you are right now, and why you've got these health concerns is because the way you've eaten up until now. So perhaps what you need to do, you need to think about how you're going to choose food wisely so it will allow you to have a long and healthy life. So rather than thinking about short-term goal, let's say I want to lose 5 pounds, try to think about, I'm trying to avoid coronary heart disease. I'm trying to prevent likelihood of getting cancer. I'm trying to strive for being the best grandpa in the neighborhood and being able to play with my grandkids in my 60s, 70s, 80s and not worrying that, they're going to break my back or that I'm going to be short of breath. And the beauty is that from a bigger picture, you start realizing that all these, short-term diets can be very healthy for you because they are unsustainable. So the way I see it is that the principle, we've been talking about principles. For me, it's a key to have at least a third of my plate filled with veggies, maybe even more. The second important thing is to eat the veggies first. And the third principle that I like to apply in my life, I like to eat twice a day. I don't like to eat. I've tried, many different patterns. When I was doing bodybuilding, I would eat 6-7 times a day. And yes, fair enough, your body can condition to it and can get used to it. But like I said, we're all different and we all respond to different diets in a different way. So with me, I have a tendency to gain weight quite easily. And because of that, I really, really have to watch what I eat and the amount of food I eat. And that's why it's so important for people to understand that there's no size fits all. So you cannot really expect someone to, prepare a diet for you that will work perfectly for you. No, you just have to work it out, what works for you. And sometimes it takes a long time to get there. So I'm not going to say it's easy. It's simple, but it's not easy.
So there's the stock phrase that we're all familiar with, you are what you eat. And I thought, well, so does that make me a burger and chips? And that's a kind of flippant way of looking at it. I'm not quite sure what they're trying to get at, you are what you eat, but I kind of turned it around and thought, well, maybe you are why you eat as well. It's a different way of looking at it. And you're saying why you eat is your long-term goals. So you want to be healthy, and yeah, you want a body that functions well in your old age, and you see that what you eat really has a big part to play in that. And it also affects how your body works now as well.
Body and mind.
And that effect, yeah. So I think it's a healthy way to look at it. And I think what we can do when looking at our relationship with food is cultivate, look, why are we eating? So there's many reasons why we eat. We obviously, first and foremost,
Survival.
we have to. Survival, sustenance. And maybe within that, for our body, we're eating for strength maybe, or for recovery. Or for health, or for different reasons, and then mentally we've got all these other reasons. It's maybe, like you say, maybe it's pleasure, maybe it's social lubrication. I mean, food is such a great way to spend time together. It gives us purpose. There's routine, and yeah, I think it's worth looking at these things on our own individual basis, because, as you say, we're all different. We all are in slightly different circumstances, and we all look at the world and food is part of our world in different ways. And so we're going to interact with it in different ways. But yeah, you've made me question and think about my responsibility to food and intake and how it's going to affect me in the long term.
Personal responsibility here is absolutely crucial, because when the people eat unhealthy diets today, they don't really think about the consequences of that, because they can't see the immediate negative impact on their life. It's only when they get to the point where they're having a first heart attack, only at that point they start thinking, okay, maybe I should rethink my dietary choices, and I think that that should be the key priority for us, and try to avoid regrets that we could have avoided. But that's the problem. Today's society and advertisement and everyone, it's promoting the unhealthy type of living. Unfortunately, you never see a beautiful advertisement of, let's say, radishes. You never see anything that's that's natural, because there's no money to make.
Well, as you say, it's a big factor. Eating healthy can, to me, in my mind, what pisses me off sometimes is it just seems difficult. Unhealthy food, the processed food, it's cheap, it's easy, it's quick, and it fills me up, and I'm not going to be farting all the time. So sometimes that seems to be a repercussion of what a lot of veg and different stuff.
Adjustment process, I guess.
Sure.
Once you adjust, it goes away.
Yeah. I guess the thing about unhealthy food is it's easy, it's cheap, and
it's tasty.
It's tasty, and it's it fills you up, and then you don't need to think about it. And that's the thing. It's another thing in life is to think about food. And a lot of people, I think, myself included, sometimes you just can't be bothered. You just just tick it off the box. Just get it done. And the idea of, well, making healthy food is there's preparation, there's time. Sometimes it's a lot more expensive as well. And I think that's where I fall down a lot of the time, is having not done the preparation.
Perhaps you're not considering this aspect of your life to be a priority. If this is a must for you, prepare your meals first thing in the morning or last thing in the evening, because that way, if it's already there, it's so much more convenient, so much easier to reach for it. If you want to start eating healthier, you should start preparing your meals in advance. I know that you can't really have, a wonderful steak prepared, a night before and enjoy it the same way as it's freshly made. But then you have to ask yourself, how would you feel if you had cancer next year? I bet that 99.9 of the people would tell you, I would be horrified. That would be a terrible thing. I don't want to die. But when it comes to food, when I try to say to people that try to look after what you eat, try to look after yourself right now, try to be more physically active and all that, they think, oh, you're just preaching. Yeah, it's not that important. I'm going to worry about it, when I'll get there. But that's the point, you don't want to get there. And the only way to prevent getting there to begin with is by making a small adjustments. I'm not saying to everyone that you just have to be super strict and eat nothing but vegetable and this is the only way forward. No. Try to be mindful. Try to make healthier choices. So even when I'm out and about, let's say, rather than going to McDonald's and buying, let's say, some huge burger, what I would do instead, I would think, okay, is there anything else that I could eat that would be a better option? And then perhaps there's a Subway. There's a Subway. You can go and get a sandwich filled with veggies. I know it's still a form of a fast food, but it's a much better option than going and getting a burger in a McDonald's. Whatever you eat, try to think about, is there anything else that I could choose instead that's going to be healthier, even at 10%? And I think that's a really good start, because once you get into habit of doing this, over time, it's going to be much easier to implement all the other options. And yeah, like I said, I don't want to preach. I don't want to say everyone, oh, you just have to do this and this and this, or you're all going to die of cancer or something. But the reason why we have created this channel is because we want to help people to understand that these things are much easier than they think.
There's an aspect to this topic that really interests me, and that is the why. So physiologically we need food, but psychologically we all have such a different relationship with food, and when you look at that, you can see the extremes. Like you think of like bulimia, anorexia. There's a power and control aspect there. The relationship they have with food is a bit extreme there, where it's an opportunity to have power and control over the life. Yeah. Do you have any experience with that?
Well, let me put it this way. When I started dieting, when I started my fitness journey over 10 years ago, I think I got to the point that it was quite unhealthy for me to constantly obsess with the food. First thing after you wake up, you think about food, and you finish eating, and then you're already thinking, okay, there's this much time that I need for my next meal. And I think that when you get to that point, it's not good. It's absolutely not good. And it can become, it can go way out of control if you don't spot it, soon enough. When I used to do bodybuilding and I was getting bigger and bigger, and I looked in the mirror and I thought that I wasn't big enough. I was never big enough. And you get to the point you start realize that, this is unhealthy. Why is it happening? Because everyone around me was telling me, you look like a walking ball. It's easier to walk around you or jump over you than walk around you.
That's a pretty good put there. That's quite funny. Cheeky monkeys, but it's quite funny. Sure.
Yeah, but that can be really dangerous, especially for young girls.
Yeah. I think it'd be dangerous for anybody. I think there's a slight stereotype there, and I think it's probably accurate a lot of the times, but I think sometimes that the reasons maybe behind anorexia and bulimia, I think any eating thing is probably hugely to do with identity. It's like why is that relationship going a bit wrong? I think it could maybe also be to do with the rules that you're setting yourself. So there's a different aspect. Like we've looked a lot about people who maybe aren't thinking about food, and they're just like, it's easy, you just consume it, don't want to spend the time and effort investing in, don't want to be thinking about it all the time. And that's an aspect, but there's other people who have rules, and we didn't really speak about that so much. I mean, you've got the religious aspect, and what it means to them. It's like they're not going to eat pig, and you've got other aspects, like you've got the psychological ones, the associations. you see it with kids all the time. It's much more to do with texture often than it is to do with taste, because you're like, you eat that, you like that usually, but the way it's presented, maybe it's mixed in with a few things, or it's the texture and they don't like it. The same way as association. An old guy I was working with, he lived at a time before refrigerators, which it seems like I always remember having refrigerators, but it isn't long ago that people didn't have refrigerators. A new invention.
Yeah, I know.
That there's still people, lots of people that live now that didn't live in the time of refrigeration. So for him, the meat was kept in a cupboard in the kitchen, and he told me about a time his mum opened the cupboard and there was a big bit of meat, and there's this like big millipede crawling over the meat, and he had a problem with, he wasn't vegetarian, but he didn't eat much meat. He just couldn't eat it. He had like a gag response to it, and he said that he reckons it's that time ever since then. So there's all sorts of psychological aspects that go along with our relationship with food, and
also ethical reasons for some.
Sure, yeah. Well, it's a big one. Probably more nowadays than possibly ever before. Certainly a big rise in veganism and kind of food, looking at it from the animal's perspective, and like look at the palm oil thing. That's a kind of, it's not an animal food product, but it's affecting animals, and so for that reason, so sustainability and environmental impact, big factors for food. Just so many different aspects. It's such a massive topic. People's relationship with food psychologically, which really fascinates me.
Speaking of veganism, I'm not the biggest fan of it. I understand and I appreciate completely why people want to do it. They want to save the planet. They want to prevent the genocide that we're basically doing on these poor animals. Probably in a couple of 100 years, when our grandchildren are going to look at us, they're going to think that it was unhuman for us to kill all these animals just for meat. And yes, I can absolutely understand that. And I think that at this point in my life, I'm probably overeating meat, but I enjoy it so much. So it's strange, and the moment I start thinking about, how these animals are being treated and killed, it makes me want to stop. Makes me want to stop eating meat. But at the same time,
here's a question for you.
So easy to forget about it. You go to the shop and, it just sits nicely wrapped in the...
So is it the meat you're craving? Or is it the salt and the fat?
I don't know. Taste.
Yeah. So here's the strange thing I find. My dad makes a really good vegetable curry. It's got cardamom in it and probably a bit of fat, salt. It's just so tasty. And when I eat that, it tastes meaty, but there's no meat in it.
Okay. It's very clever.
But it makes me think, is it really the meat? Like, what my point is I've accustomed myself in my brain for meat and two veg. That's the expectation. It's like, you put something in front of me and there's no meat. It's like, it's not really a meal, is it? It's like, it's kind of a meal, but it's not a proper meal. Like if I'm going out to a restaurant, there's no way I'm ordering some food with no meat in it. I'm not going to be ordering pasta salad because I'm paying for this thing. And it's like, there's a value thing in my head as well about meat where I associate. It's like, oh, it's a steak, it's worth this much. It's chicken, not quite such an expensive meat. So that goes on in my thinking with my food as well. So I guess when I'm thinking about changing the relationship with food, maybe that's something that I could tweak. Maybe I'm not saying I want to be a vegetarian as such, but I do think I want to cut down on the amount of meat I consume because I don't think it's healthy.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree.
And so how do I do that? And do I change my thinking a bit where I can view a meal? Well, I want to develop my culinary ability to be able to make tasty food that appeals to me and that I enjoy. I don't want to eat something. I want to enjoy food. I want it all. I want the long-term perspective. I want to be a healthy old man with lots of vitality for my grandchildren. But at the same time, I also want to enjoy my food. I don't want a bland yucky, time-consuming, expensive diet.
This is exactly the way most people think about healthy food. That it's just not gonna be that enjoyable, that, I don't deprive myself of all these goodies. But in reality, from my own experience, all these healthy foods that, initially are so difficult to swallow, over time, you get to the point that you start craving these things. I remember when I started dieting at the very, very early stages, and I've learned about porridge boiled in water with egg whites. And when I've tried it for the first time, it was completely disgusting. Honestly.
Sounds disgusting, I have to admit.
Yes. But after getting into habit of eating this every morning, I got to the point that I actually not only started to like it, but I've started craving it so much that I would rather have this than any other form of breakfast. So even though something tastes bland to begin with, something you would never consider to be tasty, over time, you do get used to everything. I think that the great example here would be One Day from the Life of Ivan Denisovich. In that book, when they're talking about food, they're talking about something that most of us would never even put in our mouths. But because they got used to it, they start to enjoy it, and they can fully appreciate the flavor of it. And I think that that's one of the biggest problems, is that our taste buds are completely obliterated by all these, super salty and savory foods. And I think that we're just desensitized. And all we have to do is just try to reduce that super flavored food.
I think there's a really good hack there, and that is to change the perspective in your mind. Take an alternative perspective about your food, and think about it in the situation of, in this horrible other circumstances where this was all I had to eat, being served this, I'll be like, oh wow, this is the best thing ever. And maybe you've got to give yourself an actual experience, an example of that. And I think anybody that's fasted, I know you have, when you break that fast, usually whatever you break it with, even if it's something really bland, like say it's a yogurt or an apple, that's the best yogurt and the best apple you've ever tasted. And so it gives you that ability to have a different perspective of something bland. So maybe that is a useful hack for people.
It is, and another reason for that is that we have this this idea in our mind that we need a certain amount of calories to survive, because that's what that's what scientists are telling us. But I would beg to differ. I think that we're all different, and I think that we could not only sustain our lives, but we could live longer if we are to reduce amount of food that we eat. That would directly impact the amount of pleasure you actually take from eating. Because if you eat 3-4 meals a day, you don't even get to the point that you're hungry. And that should give us all a hint. Maybe we need to reduce the amount of food that we eat. And again, I think it's a habit. One of the things I've learned from my own experiences, after having a meal, you just feel sluggish. You just, all you want to do is lie down, which makes sense. Back in the day, we were hunting for animals. You would normally hunt on empty stomach.
Sure.
And after having a big meal, you would need a rest. You wouldn't be eating and then, being full of energy and running after, some wild animals, would you? So yeah, these are little things that are really, really worth of considering.
I was surprised in the days when I used to go to the gym, and maybe those days will come again. But yeah, in the days when I did go to the gym, one of the things that surprised me was during a period of fasting. So I've not eaten anything for maybe 3-4 days, and I go to the gym and I'm not feeling super energy, full energy for sure. And I'm expecting it's really going to affect my strength. Like I'll be able to lift a smaller amount of weights. And it doesn't. It doesn't at all. I can lift exactly the same weights. And that was a bit of a revelation for me, because I think you're right. I think a lot of the time people have this idea in their mind, particularly people who are training or for body development, that they must eat the food. I mean, there's something true there. You do need the food to build the body, but psychologically they've got a relationship there where they think that the body must have this food. They must have this amount of protein. They're taking in protein shakes and lots of meat and all the rest of it. And the reality is your body can't take in that much protein anyway. It's probably not good for you.
Plus, the weights process, it's probably not good for you, period.
Sure.
And that's one of the things that, it's worth of, touching on, is that the fitness industry is so huge that they convinced so many of young people, not only young people, all the people, that you need to have these supplements. You need to have that protein powder to achieve whatever goal you're looking for. And I think that what people don't realize is that very often the reason why these things work is a placebo effect. If you believe that this powder is going to make you stronger, even if it's just, filled with nothing other than whey protein, it will make you stronger, because that's the way our psychology works. And our mind is so much more powerful than we give it a credit for. And that's another thing, when you said that when you go to the gym, you would expect that your strength would drop down. Let's say if you say to yourself in your mind that, let's say 55 kilo is the maximum that you can lift. You go there, you look at the bar, there's a 57 kilo on it. You try to push it, you can't overcome that barrier, it's just too much. But on the other hand, you lie down thinking there's a 55 kilo, but somebody, you were looking, put extra 10 kilo on it. And you manage to do exactly the same amount of reps that you did before, only because you thought that was what you're capable of. And I think that's going to be a topic for another time, when it comes to fitness. But that's the mindset. So is there any takeaway from what we're talking about right now, or?
Our relationships with eating, I think, is the takeaway. So changing our perspective on eating, re-examining our eating, and looking at the reasons for why we eat what we eat, and trying something a bit new.
Yeah, and I think what's really, really important for everyone to hear is that when you start a healthy eating routine or a new diet, and let's say you will stumble and you will fall off the wagon and you will have some cake, you will have some junk food or anything like that, don't get discouraged by this. Just take one step at a time and start over tomorrow morning, because it's really worth it.